Hello everyone, and welcome back to Inside ArtScroll, where the books you read and the people who write them come to life. Today we have the privilege of being joined by Daniel Retter, the author of HaMafteach on Talmud Bavli and Shisha Mishnah. Thank you, Mr. Retter, for being with us. And I'm excited to talk to you about your magnum opus, a volume that you've put tremendous effort into, and the forthcoming expanded volume, which we'll talk about. So tell us how you got into putting together HaMafteach and why it took such an interest in your life.
Well, I've been going to yeshiva since, I guess I'm 6 years old. And ultimately I began to learn Gemara and Tosfos and Rashi. And it always bothered me why there was no index to the Gemara. But I didn't pay much attention. Then as I became a lawyer, I realized that every academic book, every educational book has an index. Like I always tell my clients, I don't have to know where everything is, but I have to know how to find it. Right. And I'm saying to myself, why hasn't there been a Mafteach until now? So I did some history, I did some research actually, and I recognized that the reason there was no, in effect, a reference guide or indexed reference guide on Shas was because Shas evolved. It evolved to a point where there was really no daf as we know it, and Amud as we know it, until many, many, many years after the Gemara was, so to speak, discovered or actually written. So you have rabbinical HaKadosh, and you have the Savaroyim, and then you have the Goinim, and there was no daf. As a matter of fact, if you look at Rashi, he'll say, Ayin Bavakama Perek Rishon. Rashi never says daf what. Later on, the editor said what daf it was, because there was no such thing as a daf in Rashi's times. So then you had the Sansino, uncle and nephew. They're the ones who created, in effect, what we call the Tzur Sadaf today. But they never really got to Shas. They did a half a Masechta, it didn't work out. Then a fellow by the name of Daniel Bamberg, he is the one who was not religious, he's not Jewish, he was a Christian, but he was from Antwerp, although he did his publishing in Venice. He had an assistant, Jewish fellow, his name I think was Rabbi Levi, I don't remember his name, who introduced him to Hebrew font. And he decided to print all of Shas. And he continued the Tzur Sadaf of the Sansinos. This is from Italy. He moved it over to Venice, where they were permitted to publish, because Venice was basically an independent country, independent city-state. And he published it known as the Bamberg Shas. At that point, and this followed by a few years, the printing press by, I forgot who, forgive me, it'll come to me. Okay, so the printing press, was it Gutenberg? Yeah, Gutenberg, he invented the printing press. And the first Hebrew Sefer that was printed, some say it was the Aruch, but at the end of the day it was Bamberg who printed the Shas. And he printed, I think it was 16 volumes of all of the Shas. What's interesting is, the author of the Mesos Shas was Yeshua Boaz. And he printed the Mesos Shas, or he wrote it, within 15 or 20 years after Bamberg printed it. It wasn't a coincidence, because now for the first time you had the daf and amud, because the Mesos Shas is see daf so-and-so, daf so-and-so. Of course he was a genius because there's no computers in those times. So at the end of the day, they invented they created the daf and amud alphabet base setup. Then at that point, Shas was really learned by very relatively few people, an elite, bnei yeshiva, etc. And if they wanted to find something, they go to the Rebbe. Rebbe and Rebbeim were for 5, 10, 15 Talmidim. And therefore, there was no reason that you had to have it, because you ask Rav Kanievsky, he doesn't need an index. He knows it by heart, because he's Rav Kanievsky, okay? So there were many, many Gedolim who existed as Rebbeim, and the Talmidim would go ask the Rebbe, because they had a personal relationship with the Rebbe. Fast forward to the Daf Yomi. Along comes Rav Meir Shapiro, and he says, we want all of Klal Yisrael to learn Daf Yomi. Why? So that if two Jews are on a railroad and they're going from Minsk to Pinsk, they can talk about the same daf that they both learned. That's a classic thing of Rav Meir Shapiro. Okay. Then Daf Yomi all of a sudden became something which a lot of people were learning, not just people in the yeshiva, but Bata Mosa. But there was really no way for them to be able to find out where a particular sugya was because there was no index, so they struggled with it. Then along came ArtScroll. ArtScroll revolutionized the Daf Yomi. They took Rav Meir Shapir's idea and they revolutionized it, both in English and in Hebrew. All of a sudden, everybody was learning Gemara. Now, people were willing to criticize. As a matter of fact, I understand that the Israeli Goyim were not willing to give the Haskama so quickly because they said, listen, you want everybody to learn Gemara in English? And they finally were convinced that it's the right thing to do at the right time. I then realized that Daf Yomi now was being learned by many, 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 many people, by thousands, tens of thousands of people. Another phenomenon. All of a sudden, yeshivas like the Mir, there weren't 50 kids in a class, there were 500 people, right? You had thousands of people in the yeshiva now. One Rebbe was teaching hundreds of children. So there was a little less personal relationship between the Talmud. And if the Talmud wanted to know where something was, he didn't just walk up to the Rebbe, he had to go to a mashgiach, he had to go this, whatever. So at the end of the day, you had a confluence of automation. You now had printed Gemaras, you have the Daf Yomi, you have the ArtScroll, but you're missing in effect an index, what I call an indexed reference guide to the Gemara. So at that point, I said to myself, why should this sefer not be indexed in effect? So I met with various Rosh Yeshiva. I said, you know something? I want you to go to your Bachrim and ask them for subjects. It could be Bov Metzia, Ela Metzias, it could be Taharis, Medris, or Avatum, etc., from the easiest to the hardest. I want to have all of the inyanim you can think of. Because in order to make HaMafteach, you have to have everything that a person wants to think of. It's like if you're looking up a word in a dictionary, if it's not there, you throw it in a dictionary. What goes in a dictionary if I can't find out? If I want to spell scissors, the word scissors is not there, you throw it in the dictionary. So I want to make sure that you would have a comprehensive.
Now, what year? I'm sorry. What year was this that you came to this revelation that you wanted to launch this project?
7 years before 2001. What would that be?
1994.
Why am I thinking 1987? 1994 was it? No, it was earlier than that. In the early 90s.
Okay.
Early 90s, right? Because it took me 7 years to put it together. 3 years the Hebrew, 4 years the English. So about 7 years. Okay, so
now if we're talking about the 90s,
and we published it in 2001. It came out in 2001. So about 7 years before.
With the advent of computers and the internet, some people, the natural question would be, Daniel, it's a great project, but why do we need it in a volume?
Excellent.
I'll find what I need.
Excellent. So let me use the Bar Ilan as an example. Bar Ilan. Okay. A small example. Bar Ilan is a search engine. You put in Rava, there are 4,500 Ravas in Shas. That is not necessary for most people to know. But they want to know Yal Kagam. They want to know the important parts. So hold that for a moment. Then you have an interesting Gemara in Bava Kama, Daf Pei, which is a story about various Amoraim, I think Rav and Shmuel, whoever, and they talk about a Suda of Pirk, it's called Yeshua Saben. It's a Gemara speaking like Yeshua Saben. What's Yeshua Saben? It's Machlokes Rashi and Tosfos. Some say it's the Suda of a Bris Milah, some say it's the Suda of a Pidyon Aben. Because the word Yeshua could be Purkan, and Rashi calls it Purkan Aben, Purkan. But that's a very no one calls that Purkan Aben Yeshua Aben. So if you want to look, where's the makar of Pidyon Aben in Gemara? That's the makar. The makar that you have a Suda of a Pidyon Aben, the makar is in the Gemara in Bava Kama Daf Pei. But the word Pidyon Aben is not mentioned. So if you go through a search engine, let's say a Bar Ilan, look on the Pidyon Aben, there are other mentions of Pidyon Aben, but no one over there will see this Gemara in Daf Pei. Why? Because the word Pidyon Aben is not found there. In HaMafteach, it's not a search engine. It's written for Talmidei Chachamim. It's written for people who are Yedei Torah and people who have an appreciation of that. So if you look over here in the Pidyon Aben, it'll cite you to the Gemara of Purkan Aben.
Even though it's not that particular
exactly,
verbiage.
because it's not a search engine. It's not a search engine. So to answer your question, If you go on a computer and you look for Peter Ben, you're not going to find it. All right? So that's just one example. So so basically, it took me 7 years to put it together, and I had to get the subjects. So I went to various rabbanim, and I didn't tell them why. I was afraid that someone else would do it before me. Very famous story of the Beis Yosef and the Beis Yosef and the Ramah. They were working on the same idea. One was in Krakow, one was in Tzfat, and they didn't know. I don't think they knew what they were doing. There was no internet then. And the mazel of the Ramah was that although the Beis Yosef came out first, the mazel of the Ramah was that he was for the Ashkenazim, the Beis Yosef was for the Sfardim, so they mashed them together. But you have a very sad story. I'm not going to mention some names of a very well-known person who's putting the Ramban together. He lived in America, very, very well-known person. And he worked on it for years and years and years. And then 6 months before he was finished, someone else came out with the Ramban. And they say he died because of that. He was heartbroken. So I was afraid that if the idea would come out, that I put all of this effort and work into it, that somebody else would do before me. So it is what it is.
Now, did you compile the listings manually, or were you able to use a computer in order to assist you in coming up with the topic?
The listings were manual. In other words, I had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds.
Thousands.
And then, once I had, let's say, Shabbos, then I went through Malachis.
Subcategories.
So this was all man-made. This was all created. So what I did was, I took an Indian of Shabbos, and then I went Malachas Surais, and then we had Malachas dealing with farming, Malachas dealing with eating, etc., 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 and then stories about Shabbos, etc. So this, of course, was not done by computer, because this concept, the composition of it, was something which never had been done. As a matter of fact, when I went to the copyright office in Washington to get a copyright on this, they said to me, Mr. Retter, we don't give copyrights for an index. Because an index, you've got a copyright for something you're creating. You can take a telephone book and scramble it a different way. Yes, alphabetical, not alphabetical, first name, last name first name last. You can't copyright that. It's got to be something new. So I brought him the ArtScroll. I said, listen, you're going to see that what I've done is, and I gave him the example of Yeshua Ben. He says, oh, you're right, that word is not in there. So it's really not an index, it's a reference. I said, right, it's a reference guide. So as a matter of fact, it's called an indexed reference guide. And that's how we got so they said, you know what? We're going to give you a copyright for organization, for composition, for the way you set it up, because we didn't literally translate. It's not a word search engine. It's not a search engine. As a matter of fact, all of the search engines, you can't get a copyright on that. Because why? Because you're not creating anything new. All you're doing is you're organizing all this. You can't copyright the telephone book because you're not creating anything new there. You're taking names and phone numbers, you're putting it, and lists are not copyrightable. So that's why these aren't, and this is.
Now, after you put out your first version, did you have people coming over to you and say, Mr. Retter, you left out Kimle B'derabim, you left out this?
Beautiful. So let me back up to that. I had the Hebrew first, and I was literally dying to get it out. But I was afraid if I got it out in Hebrew, then somebody would just go to Google and they would scramble it. You can translate Google, and then you'd have a half-baked English one, which I didn't want. So I held on to it. I said no. And also I was afraid somebody would copy the idea in English. So for 7 years, it was like I'm not a Novi, but Novi Shekavash Nevuaso for prophet doesn't disclose like Yaina. He was punished. He was supposed to say Nevi'is. He didn't. So I knew that I had a tough get over here to get out with it, but I was afraid to do it so prematurely. So I did it after 7 years. Now, another interesting thing, and I'll get to your answer. Usually, we have magnificent haskamas in here from Rav Kanievsky, Libodel, Rav Chaim, Rav Shteinman, and from Hasidish and Sfardish and Litvish and every kind of board we have haskamas. Now, typically, when you write a sefer, you go to your Rav and your Shul and to your Rebbe, and you finish the sefer in a certain month. After it's finished, you show it to them, and they're very happy, and they give you a haskama. So the date of the haskama is typically very, very close to the date of publication. All these haskamas are 7 years before it was published. Why? Because my wife, my wife Margie, said to me, you're going to do all this over here, and work on it, and then you're not going to get any haskamas. They're going to say, they're going to say, don't do it that way. So I got the haskamas first, and I just showed them galleys of it. So once I got the skummas, then I went ahead and it took me another 5-6 years to put it together. So your question was, what was the reaction when it was printed? In the HaMafteach, it says, if there are any comments or errors that you find, please email me. So I'm up there. Baruch Hashem, I got about 500 emails. None of them were criticism, none. And they were all complimentary. And I would receive one or two from, you could see really Bnei Torah, mostly from ArtScroll, who said, I would have done it a little differently. You wrote Beis Hamikdash, you didn't say Beis Hamikdash Rishon Sheni, etc.
Right.
You got to refine. Also, you should cross-reference, like, Bezdin, Minyan of Binyan, you should mention with Shmuel Navi. So I realized that I had to refine it, but they were all complimentary. I got one or two very nasty ones from Goyim, who said, the Bible, the Talmud, it's over. But of course, I received only very, very nice ones. Now, there's one thing which is very, very important. We deal with something called Gentiles and Akum. And we have to make sure that there's Shalom Yisrael. So I realized that anytime the Gemara mentions something that may have been considered to be derogatory or considered to be not politically correct, I changed it to Akum. Avodas kachav mazolis, idolater. Well, who can get insulted? Nobody's an idolater today. But to say a Gentile, so you could say a Gentile, let's say the English one, is not able to testify. Nobody gets insulted about that. So these are things that I had to refine. So the reaction, Baruch Hashem, is very, very positive. Now, we're now coming with HaMafteach HaChadash. What you see over here now is something which was completely upgraded. What does that mean? Originally, the Mafteach was a macro sefer. Macro. One volume over here. We had all the popular memories, the popular inyonim that everybody knew about. And where's the place? But I said to myself, it's not satisfactory. I want to have a micro, meaning I want it to be a kind of Mafteach where even the smallest thing should be there as well. For example, you're learning Gemara, and then 30 blot later on you say, we just had this thing with a bio over here, such and such, he was in Fum Nahara, he was in Nerdah. What's it about? I put that in also. So you're going to find now that the Mafteach HaChadash, which Yetz Hashem is going to come out very soon, and I'm so proud that ArtScroll agreed to act as the publisher and distributor, and of course I consulted with many of their Talmidei Chachamim in ArtScroll. I mean, they have a group of Talmidei Chachamim like bar none, and we consulted with them, and we changed it, we fixed it, etc., etc., etc. So the Mafteach HaChadash is really, it's the Mafteach, what I would call upgraded. Forgive the Lashon, on steroids. We've added about 40% more,
really?
And yet 40% more arachim, which are subjects, and magnificence, naturally. And yet we still did it in one volume. Why? The genius of Shia Brander. Shia Brander, he said, let's not do it in two columns. We'll make it in 3 columns, but we'll make it in such a way that it isn't even smaller.
So you fit more on a page.
We fit more on a page.
But it shouldn't feel so tight
and it's not
condensed.
Squeezed. It's almost like we said the Aron Kosh over there. It fit into a place which it didn't have a size for it. Al Nes Oimid. Over here also, between Shia and Ben Gassner, who is a graphic artist from Israel, geniuses, all right? And it's like, you take a dictionary, you read it, then you put it away. HaMafteach, it draws you in. Let me see the next one. Because the font and the spacing, the graphics are magnificent. And it makes you want to even look more and more and more. Or they say, why? You're just looking something up. I want to look for more and more.
Now I have to interrupt for a second. Anyone who's watching this,
the
thousands and thousands of people all over the world are hearing your passion, your excitement. This is clearly your life's work. You live it. You breathe it. I could tell just hearing you recount the history of putting it together. By profession, though, you're an attorney, a successful attorney. How does an attorney come to take on such a project and really make it your life's passion?
Well, I did a lot less lawyering.
But what I meant was really, who was your inspiration in your younger years in terms of your Talmudic background, your chinuch, people who influenced you to love Gemara learning the way you do, that you would put in such effort and do so much less lawyering?
I will tell you. Rav Simcha ben Ehrenfeld, the Matzah of Rav, he was the son of the Matzah of Rav when I learned the Chassan Sofer. Rav Tirnauer.
From Shomer Shabbos?
No, Rav Tirnauer, he's no longer alive. He was my Rebbe in Matzah Sofer, he was my Rebbe there. They were big influences in my life. Rav Pala, my Rosh Yeshiva.
You learned in
I
Makar
learned
Chaim
Makar Chaim.
by Rabbi Yamin Pala.
Yes, I did. Yes, I did.
So you grew up in Borough Park?
I know I grew up on the west side, but
West side.
I commuted. And I went to college at night, kind of a shtika. And
How long did you learn by Rav Pala?
I learned Rav Pala from the moment he opened up the yeshiva there in Borough Park.
Wow.
As a matter of fact, it was my grandfather who bought him his building.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. Rav Chaim Kanievsky. So my inspiration were my father, who I dedicated the English HaMafteach, my shver, Rav Leib Rappaport, to whom I dedicated the HaMafteach, and my grandparents, my grandfather, Rabbi Chila Kohen Rosenblatt. So they were the great, great influences in my life, where they taught me Torah derech eretz, which sometimes people saying it's not politically correct anymore. To me, it's politically correct. I'm a Torah derech eretz person, all right? But because, look at Rav Sandler, they weren't embarrassed to say what they did for a living, right? So I recognize there's a wonderful thing in having people who sit and learn all day, because, and I say to my friends, listen, in Princeton University, they do R&D, research and development. They got a lot of money for that. So the guys learning the code, they're doing R&D, they're doing research and development of Talmud. So there's nothing wrong with that. But everybody's got a different tafkid in life. Like, I think Rav Chaim Kanievsky said, when they asked about women and men at the Daf Yomi, he said, listen, men have a certain tafkid in life, and women have a certain tafkid in life. So it doesn't mean that they're discriminated against, but that's their job in life. So I feel the same way. So as a lawyer, having a love of books, having a love of letters, I learned that probably from my father. I just made it my life's, as you say, my life's passion to get this out. But without my wife helping me, it wouldn't have been done, because you have to have a wife who cooperates, who wants. Because my wife is a bastam chacham of my shver, and my children who encouraged me, and they were happy for me, and they checked it and they corrected it, etc., etc. So at the end of the day, I have a lot of akar to those people who inspired me.
Now, what type of law have you practiced?
Immigration and real estate.
Immigration and real estate.
What's the connection? People come from the different country. They usually have money if they can afford me. They make investments. I help them with the investments. That's what it is.
Got it. And you live in Riverdale now?
I live in Riverdale, yes.
How long have you lived there?
Well, I grew up in the West Side. We lived in Brooklyn for a couple of years when I went to yeshiva, when I was married. Then moved to Florida for 20 years.
Oh, wow.
Lived in Florida, Miami Beach. And then we came back here because we want our children to have chinuch. We came here for our children's chinuch. My parents said to me, Danny, why are you coming to Florida? Something wrong? I said, no, because I want my children to have chinuch here, and I don't want to be in Miami like some of my friends or my older friends with a husband and wife, like they have nobody around the table on Shabbos, and all the kids are in yeshiva in New York. I want to be with my kids. So we all decided to come to New York. My wife and I came to New York. My children were not too happy. I said, you'll be happy, don't worry, because Miami's a nice place. And Baruch Hashem, I said, at every one of your weddings, you're going to say to me before the chuppah, Daddy, thank you for moving us. Everyone did.
Now, having had a kesher to the Matis of Rav, to Rav Turnauer, to Rav Paler, any particular story stand out, an experience or an interaction that you had with them that you could share with our viewers?
You asked me now on the spot. I've got a fantastic experience I had with Rav Kanievsky. Let me tell you, it's something outstanding. Rav Kanievsky, as you know, usually wears a white shirt to 120 years plus. He's such a wonderful man. And he stands there by a stender, sits on a stender in his house. And there are always people around him. Have you ever been there? You see there's always people around him. So I went in there to present him the sefer because he gave me a haskama on the sefer. I went in to present him the sefer, had it in my hand. He looked at me, didn't recognize me, because this is like 7 years after he gave me that haskama. He's probably given haskamas to thousands of, or mechta brach, whatever they call it. I walked in there, and I don't wear a beard, I don't wear a shtramel. So imagine the kids around him say, this is going to be entertaining. American guy comes, let's see what's going to happen over here. But I speak Yiddish. So I spoke to him. I had the sefer, the big volume I had, which I showed you, but you wanted to have this because it fits better into the little stender here. I said to Hilgi Rosh Hashiva, I'd like to present you, the Rosh Hashiva, mit Sefer HaMafteach for the Rosh Hashiva gegeben Mechta Bracha. He looks at it, and he takes it from me. He leans back on his seat, and he's flipping through the pages, flipping. He's looking for something. His eyebrows are furrowed, looking for something. He sees it. And as he's going through, I say, oh my gosh, if he can't find what he's looking for, he'll take back the Mechta Bracha. That'd be very embarrassing. A big smile. He stands up, he gives me a hug, and he gives me all sorts of brachas that it should be matzliach, and Baruch Hashem was the sky. I said, would the Rosh Hashiva, can mizogim, I'll say it in English, would the Rosh Hashiva tell me, please, what he was looking for? He says, yeah. He says, I'm in the middle of a diyun. I'm in the middle of a trial. I said, Shiva is in the middle of a trial? Shiva is a litigant? A baldin? He said, chas v'shalom. He says, let me tell you. He says, there's a big din Torah in Yerushalayim, and the Bezdin made a mistake, and they awarded a lot of money to one of the parties. And the party who lost and paid the money is suing the Bezdin because of the mistake. So they asked me what halacha is. Now in Gemara Lashon, that's called tashlumin. Nezik and tashlumin, it depends if it was a matter of discretion, if they forgot a Mishnah, it makes a big difference. But he says this would be called pitzuim, damages in Hebrew, modern Hebrew. He says, I wanted to see if the Mafteach had it under the Gemara Lashon or under pitzuim. And I found under pitzuim also. He said to me, I see you put it in the Hebrew also. I said, yes. He says, good. Dibur Tarek Loshem Ani Adam. He said, your Mafteach has to speak to everybody, not just to the people who know it under Tashlumin. People look under Pitzuin Bezdin. And there's a thing called Pitzuin Bezdin. And that's what I was looking for. So I said, wow, this is something. And then the PS is, I went to Rav Shteinman the same day to be Mechaber in Sefer. Rav Shteinman Libodel. Rav Shteinman sees me and says, do mit the Mafteach. I said, wow, he saw me 7 or 8 years before that. He remembered me. Can you imagine? I said, wow. That blew my mind. So that was, I'll tell you a story of Rav Tir now. It's a little embarrassing, but I'll tell it to you. I had a chabrusa. We learned in Chassan Seifa in East 6th Street. Remember, East 4th Street was the main place, and 6th Street was a public school. We rented it. Okay. So we had a fair. Two things, Rav Tir. Two things. He was my first Rebbe when I came to Chassan Seifa. He said, he asked the kasha, he asked me a kasha, he asked my chabrusa kasha, and we didn't know the answer. He says, okay, Yamod Bala Shoyer al Shoyrei. He says, I want to know who's the owner of this shore over here. So it was like a crack. But then, the first time I saw him, he said, and he spoke to the whole class. He says, Megate in the subway, in the Zimmer, you go to the subway in the summer, and Mezait Froen un Hand un Fies. You see women without hands, without feet. Betonish kicking. Not allowed to look. I don't know what he's talking about. So I come home, I said, Daddy, you're not going to believe it. My Rebbe said that we go in the subway, you see women without hands, without feet. Now look at them. He says, no, that's what it means. Un hand un feet means that the feet are uncovered and the hands are uncovered. So that's the expression. So I remember this stayed with me for all my life, un hand un feet. And the last thing was, we once asked the Rebbe, if you're in a store and you're not sure if it's kosher, this was before OU was so popular. Remember, you see Goldenberg's peanut juice. If it said pure vegetable oil, it must be kosher. So you remember, you may be not that old, but nowadays there was no OU. OU wasn't as popular. So he said to the Rebbe, if you're not sure if it's kosher or not, allowed to eat it? So he told me something which I've repeated dozens and dozens of times to my friends who are Jewish, my friends who are not Jewish. He says, you know what? If you're not sure if something is poison or not, would you eat it? I said, no. He says, consider it the same way. If you're not sure if it's kosher, you're not sure if it's poison. So when I walk into a store and I see something, and I'm not sure it's kosher, right away it rings the bell. I said, my Rebbe said, you got to remember, if it would be poison or not, would you eat it? No. So when people say to me, Mr. Retter, how can you go and eat something which is not, maybe it's kosher, but it's not kosher? I said, I'm afraid it's like poison to me and I wouldn't touch it. So that's kind of the influence that I had.
Stayed with you.
Of the German word called Kinderstube. My mother's born in Germany. My father's born in Vienna. So we're kind of Galiciano, although we're from very Hasidic stock. My mother's from the Alexander Hasidim. My father's in the Kapitches of Hasidim. So we're Kapitches of Hasidim, original family. So we're from that stock. And it's something called Kinderstube. Kinderstube means it's something you were taught at home. You know, when somebody comes to your house as a guest, and before they sit down, they'll say, may I sit down? Or let's say if somebody is like sleeping with you in the house for 2 or 3 days, before he goes to the refrigerator, he'll say, may I go to the refrigerator to take something? That's what you're taught in the home. You're taught that before you go to somebody, you bring them a little gift. You don't have to, but that's the way you're brought up. So the love of learning that I have is not because I'm so smart about it, but I was trained that way. That there's such chachma. You know, let's not say, they don't call him Razal, they call him Chazal. They don't call him Rabbonim Zechron Levracha, they call him Chachamim Zechron Levracha. Because these were geniuses. They were so smart. And the emunah is, if these genius people, if they're so ehrlich and so bal maminim and they believe in everything, and they're smart people, then what am I, smarter than them? If they gave up their whole life for this, I can give up part of my life for this also, because it's got to be true.
Well, you have clearly given a tremendous portion of your life, time-wise, monetarily, otherwise, into this project.
Thank you.
You've thus enhanced the Limud Gemara for untold numbers of people.
Thank you.
So on behalf of the Olam HaTorah, we thank you for your contribution, an eternal contribution. It's an honor for ArtScroll to be able to publish your latest version, the expanded version.
It's called HaMafteach HaChadash.
HaMafteach HaChadash.
Right.
And you should be zeicha for many more years to be able to enhance other people's learning and to serve as a role model of the Havas HaTorah and the respect for Limud HaTorah as you have.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the honor of being able to be interviewed.
Thank you for joining us.